Thank you for joining us for Social Media and Professional Boundaries. This is a Category A contact hour presentation. I'm Kelly Schweitzer, the Director of Continuing Education at the Ohio Nurses Association, and I have with me Jessica.
Hello, I'm Jessica Zubak, a nurse planner at ONA, and we're excited that you are hanging out for our presentation today.
So in order to receive contact hours for this presentation, you need to view the entire presentation and complete an online evaluation, and you will receive 1 hour of Category A, Continuing Nursing Education. Please note this information is not intended as legal advice. For specific advice, please contact your legal counsel. There is no conflict of interest for anyone with the ability to control content for this activity, and this activity will expire on December 1st, 2020. So make sure that you have your evaluation into us prior to that time. Our outcome for today is that you'll be able to identify one concept that you learned and how to manage social media in order to maintain your professional boundaries, prevent violation of nursing law and rules, and promote your professional ethics. So you might have noted a couple high-profile cases in the media in the past few years. We're going to highlight a couple that we came across in the literature. One that was really close to home here in Ohio. The Columbus Dispatch reported that several Central Ohio advocates are calling for increased training because a national investigation uncovered numerous incidents of healthcare workers posting humiliating and dehumanizing photos of elderly patients. So this was where some workers at a nursing home thought it would be funny to pose some of their residents in some certain poses, make some funny memes, those kinds of things, and didn't think of the repercussions that would happen. What occurred was not only these investigations, but I believe some facilities were forced to close.
You might think that these things seem obvious and that no one in the healthcare industry would actually do these things, but they do. And it's very sad that we have any content to put here as a headline, but these things were all real, taken from our headlines. And like Kelly said, this happened right here in Central Ohio.
Yeah, so if you might be thinking to yourself, I'm super careful online, I would never do such a thing, then be thinking about how you can become an advocate and maybe educate folks in your facility about the dangers. So this isn't just limited to maybe unlicensed personnel, but also licensed. You may be familiar with Joan Rivers, the talented comedian who died rather tragically a few years back after just a procedure. And prior to that procedure, the doctor took a selfie. I believe it was an endoscopy that she was having.
I think so.
Yeah. So while she was sedated, he took a selfie while she was under anesthesia. And I never saw any specific report on what happened to him, but he obviously, his name and his reputation were hurt. Yeah. So, there have been instances of where nurses have taken photos about certain things in order to highlight. I believe the person in this particular example in California, just was trying to highlight, look how dangerous it is. Look what can happen when you're on the road. And unfortunately, there was legal action sought because of emotional distress, because when they realized that particular photo of this horrific traffic accident was their family member, they were devastated that someone would use that as a tool, and they didn't really appreciate that.
And I believe in that case, the family did win that legal argument, even though they may not have said the patient's name with their photo. It wasn't hard to find out who that person is. And with this, the family knew. And whether they intended for the family to see it or not doesn't really matter. It's just not appropriate. Whatever message you're trying to send, it's not an appropriate thing.
Yeah. I think we have several examples throughout the presentation that show where student nurses were not able to become nurses because of some of the things they did while in nursing school. So the student nurse posted pictures of a woman giving birth. I just think she was so excited to be a part of that special moment and didn't think about the repercussions of, that she did something that violated the patient's rights And what happened was she wasn't able to sit for the NCLEX when this was found out. So if you are mentoring students, if you have the opportunity to engage with students as a preceptor or as a clinical instructor, I think it would be very wise to have as part of the training that you give to students the dangers of posting anything about patients, keeping themselves safe, and potentially helping them to become successful as nurses. Because if they do these kinds of actions, they could very well not be able to sit for the NCLEX. I think a lot of folks who've had iPhones as part of their in their presence since they were teens, they don't see the dangers as much because they just post everything, and they don't really have a filter sometimes for what shouldn't be posted.
Well, I think too, student nurses may not quite realize that sometimes healthcare providers will take a picture on their phone. For example, a wound. They have already got patient consent. They've done all the things they need to do. And maybe this student thought, hey, giving birth is a happy occasion. Maybe someone else was taking pictures. That doesn't mean that the student nurse can take pictures. It's not a one size fits all with consent, and just making sure that your students know, never assume consent. Just even if you see someone else doing it, doesn't mean you should do it.
Well, and another thing to tell them, and we'll talk about this throughout the presentation, is even if a patient asks you, you shouldn't be using your personal device.
Right.
Yeah. So it might have been, maybe this patient asked her, and maybe even the patient said it was okay in this instance, but the board of nursing did not think it was okay in her particular state. So take some time to be thinking how you would define professional boundary. What constitutes a professional boundary? What comes to mind when you think about you as a nursing professional and what your boundaries are? Also, what are your thoughts about what is social media? What constitutes social media? And what counts as being part of social media? So take some time to self-reflect, think about that. And then as we go throughout the presentation, see, does your definition square with what we talk about? So here's some social media sites that you're probably familiar with. In addition to your typical Facebooks, Instagrams, LinkedIn, what do you think about email as a potential social media?
My thoughts on this, and I think it's something we'll talk about the whole presentation, is if it's on the computer/internet, it can probably be found, it can probably be replicated, saved, what have you. I would treat your email account the same as any of these other social media platforms.
What about your ability to text? What do you think about texting your friends, texting your mom, whatever? Is that also a form of social media?
It's social and it's media.
There you go. Yeah, and I think a lot of times we think that all of that stuff is private, but how many of your Facebook feeds include a picture of someone's text messages back and forth? Like those funny ones where somebody's trying to tell their mom they're pregnant and they don't get it,
That's my thought. Whenever I think about, and Snapchat in particular, and text messages, I know personally, I screenshot things all the time on my phone, so I don't forget. It saves it as a picture. If I type something in a text, if I take a picture of something and I send it, somebody else can instantly screenshot that and they've got it. Yeah. And it's that simple, really. Don't type it. Don't take the picture. I mean, I've seen it happen, unfortunately, in a organization where I worked. That's what happened. Someone was having a private conversation on Facebook Messenger, and there was an argument, had nothing to do with the patient. And the other person had screenshotted that picture of what the person said, who was employed by the healthcare organization. And details and everything went forward, and that person was terminated because of her behavior. So if you say something digitally, it could be saved.
Yes. Yeah. So just be thinking about recent posts that you've posted. Would you want your employer to see that post? What was the last thing that you texted to a coworker? What was the last email you sent to your boss? Be thinking about what you put out there that can be forwarded, maybe morphed in some way. We need to be careful about that. So maybe keeping copies of what you actually said, just in case someone changes content that you had. You know, just be thinking about, what does that look like? Be thinking about too, what have you seen your coworkers post? Is there anything that maybe you should be saying, hey, Sally, I saw that recent post and I'm not so sure that was very professional, or I think that was kind of close to a patient room that you took that picture.
Right. Like, people need to think about backgrounds as well. You know, you're sitting at the nurse's station, your friend has a funny face, who knows what, and you take that photo, but what can be seen in the background? And images can be enlarged. We know even more, like Kelly said, but you can potentially, there could be a lot of patient identifying information. And, you know, regardless, it's just not a professional thing to do. I was telling Kelly this morning that someone found my Instagram and she recognized my name professionally. And somehow, I don't know, because my Instagram didn't have my name on it. You know, you can have a tag, but she found me. And, you know, my first thought was, oh, well, thank goodness my Instagram is just pictures of my dogs and now my Christmas tree, because there's nothing really that exciting on it. But it just proves a point. If I was a fan of taking scantily clad Instagram pictures, like this woman just found, and she knows I work for ONA, she knows who I am and what I've published, and no, I wouldn't want my organization to see something inappropriate. So it's my dogs and my Christmas tree.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, I don't want to scare you into not posting anything, because I know I have used social media to learn from other people in my profession. You know, another professional organization that both Jessica and I are members of, the Association for Nursing Professional Development, they have a great blog post where you can get information, you can share ideas. Here at ONA, our community hub is similar.
Right.
You're able to, you know, bring people together. You know, we do lots of legislative, we have legislative ambassadors. We do things in order to encourage people to vote, encourage people to engage with their senators and representatives. So it does give people a voice. It can be information sharing. Hey, this worked. Hey, this didn't work. I know magnet program directors, they have a way of seeking information and asking information. You just need to be really careful that when you're seeking information, say it was about a specific patient outcome or an intervention, that you're not giving patient details when requesting that information that would be able to get back.
And it's networking. Social media is great. You can connect with people from different continents and make a connection with them. And, you know, a conference I went to had people from all over the world. And if I wanted to, you know, remain in connection with these folks, social media would let me do that. And so it's an awesome thing. I'm glad that we have it in today's world. It's just one more thing that we need to be mindful of when we use it.
Yes. So I love this slide. It shows you how one post can end up all across the world. So, you know, we've seen the viral video of, you know, the cute kid, and whether or not you think the mom staged it with flour all over her kitchen, or if the kid actually really did that, I don't know. But you'll see that within months, it's had 3.2 million hits, and it's been in Iceland. It's been everywhere. So when you think about that sentence that you type, that picture that you send, that advice that you ask, just be thinking about how far spread that's going to be, and is it something that you really want to share with the world? Because that's basically what you do when you hit send, is going to be shared with the world. So now we're going to get into some of the legal and professional boundary and ethics aspects. And this is kind of the motto for the remainder, for the entire thing.
This is the presentation. If you take nothing else away from this, we should have made this our outcome. Like,
Yeah.
We want you to know, just because you can does not mean that you should.
Yes. So I think a lot of us have you know, a lot of ability to can. We can do this. It doesn't mean you should. And I had a great coworker who was a really funny person. And, you know, this wasn't anything towards what she was doing anything bad, but she would just sometimes say, not because I should, but because I can. So whenever it was about fun. So just just keep this in mind. Like I say, if you have the ability to advise others in your profession, mentoring students, mentoring new grads, mentoring some really seasoned. I know my mother-in-law has said way more embarrassing things on the internet than my daughter has. And there's even been some times where she said some things that she was, she retired as a nurse, and there's some things where I go gulp that she has said. So, anywho, if you're listening to this, mother-in-law, just know, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So here's some thoughts for you. What do you think about this? A nurse in Canada shared her negative feelings about the care a family member received on social media and emphasized that she is a nurse. So this was a case that you came across, right, Jessica?
The American Journal of Nursing actually posted an article about this. And I thought it was really interesting because as a nurse, I have family members who have certainly been in the hospital. And you can definitely see how when you're really upset about something like that, you want to take to social media. You want to let everybody know something horrible that happened. And so you can understand where this nurse was coming from. But as we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, it didn't really go too well for her to do that.
Yeah. So is this something that you personally have done? Like, have you ever been like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, I think we do it about our food all the time, right? We get on Yelp and say, yes, this was a great meal, or would never go there again, or that band was great, or they hurt my ears. So what do you think about critiquing healthcare organizations on social media? You as a nurse being able to do that. Do you think that's wise? Do you think that it was right for this nurse to fall under investigation? What do you think about the nurses who were part of her critique? They felt humiliated and that it violated professional boundaries. So think about your definition of professional boundaries. Would that be a violation under your definition?
They felt, the nurse peers at this organization basically felt that this person was a nurse and held to that higher standard, and felt that it was not part of the professional boundaries. Had this person not been a nurse, totally different situation. But we know that as nurses, we are held to that standard. We're, how many years now, the most trusted profession? I mean, we do have these professional boundaries, whether we like them or not, and we just have to, again, be mindful of that. So I can sympathize with this nurse for just needing an outlet for her feelings, but she made it very clear in her posts that she was a nurse. And I think that's part of where all this came from. And I thought it was interesting too that the Board of Nursing is actually who filed this complaint, and it went to the whole facility, or the facility, I'm sorry, read that totally wrong. The facility filed it straight to the board.
Yeah. And they were appropriate in doing that. And in thinking about this, it really reminds me of when I've traveled internationally to work on short-term mission trips and things. I've had some peers who have been very critical of nurses in other countries. And it's like, wait, guys, they do not have the same infrastructure. They don't have the same equipment. And that might have been the case between this nurse and this particular facility. Right. It might have been that, was there a disaster? Was there, maybe a flu had occurred in this facility? Maybe there were other extenuating circumstances that these nurses were not able to care for this particular patient to her, or maybe they didn't have the resources. Who knows? Or maybe she was just being overcritical and she wasn't correct. I've met nurses who think that patients should receive certain care or certain things, and they're not always right.
Right. And it is harder when it's your family member. You, at least I feel like I do, tend to have pretty high expectations. And personally, if it was something that happened to my loved one in a facility that was so bad, you can do things about that. There's plenty of outlets for you to file your own complaint or investigation, or certainly take action. And it sounded like that wasn't the case. It was just, my mom's pillow wasn't fluffed enough, and she wasn't this and wasn't that. And it's unfortunate. I'm not demeaning the situation, but yeah, if something really does occur, it is encouraged that you file
Right. Through the proper
appropriate
channels,
complaint.
right? Yeah, the nurse administrator on call, whomever. But yes, I agree. That would be the better option rather than going straight to social media. So we're going to be talking throughout the presentation different resources from ANA. ONA has some, the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. So this is ANA's opinion. Social media is also a place where nurses need to remember their ethical duties to respect patient, nurse boundaries, and their duties to coworkers. So be thinking about that as we go throughout the presentation.
These two were there included in that article, and that was ANA's response to that situation. Obviously, it had occurred in Canada, but they still put out a position saying that, you do have that duty to your coworkers.
Yeah, and as the author of our professional standards of practice, they have the authority to speak on this. A lack of professional due diligence before publicly criticizing care. So again, back to there are mechanisms where this nurse could have filed a complaint and not just on social media.
Mm-hmm.
So what is Ohio Board of Nursing? So this is a Category A.
4723, here it is.
So, we need to speak to that. So we've given some background about social media. We've given you a couple cases. And then how does that align with our rules and regulations? So the Ohio Administrative Code is the standards of practice. So this is the actual law. So this is what the legislators, ORC, and the Administrative Code
kind of further defines what that law is about. So the OAC will have the details about nursing practice, where ORC is the actual law that was passed in the legislature. And what I think of what police officers go by, those are those laws. OAC gives more detail behind it. And the board, contributes their opinion for OAC.
So that you can see okay, this is what was passed, and what do we need to do in order to meet that?
Right. Make that happen.
Yeah. So as you know, the purpose of the board is to promote patient safety. It's not to protect nurses. So this is how nurses should act in order to promote patient safety. So when circumstances come up that we are unsure of whether or not patient safety was in jeopardy, then goes back to what does the law say about that aspect. In addition, a way to keep patients safe is to keep nurses within their professional boundaries. So that's where we're going to continue to discuss here. So it's both a legal and an ethical obligation. So according to our law of the 4723 of the Ohio Revised Code, we're to establish and maintain professional boundaries. So what does that look like? What are our professional boundaries? How do we engage with patients? How do we engage with one another? So one thing that comes to mind for me is that whenever discussing boundaries or thinking of boundaries as you have a house, and I don't enter your house without asking to enter your house. And so there are times where we engage with patients where there are certain information that would help us in their care, but they have a right to those boundaries. So for example, if you have a patient who is malnourished, once you are asking some of the things, it might be due to a cancer diagnosis. It could be due to lack of resources. It could be due to maybe mental health illness. It could be due to they're being abused. Right. So as you ask those questions, is it for the purposes of helping that patient, or is it for the purposes of just kind of I'm just nosy. Yeah. So, if it's for the purposes of helping, taking a really great survey of that patient, both a subjective and objective assessment, then you are within your professional boundaries. But, if you are just asking, how much money do you make? That might draw the line there a little bit.
Well, I think now a lot of healthcare organizations are including asking questions regarding gender in the beginning of their triage. And like Kelly said, it's not about, I just want to know. It's, I need to know this to take care of you, because we know that, there are plenty of options for those who want to undergo gender
Reassignment.
transition,
Mhm.
right? And we need to know this to take the best care of them. It's not that we're nosy. We're not prying to make them feel uncomfortable or anything like that. And I think some patients need educated on that. And so that they feel more comfortable that we are maintaining those professional boundaries and doing the right thing really to keep them safe and to give them the best care.
And I think as we go through, we'll see where our ability to maintain professionalism on social media is really about this particular law.
Right.
Because there are times, for example, the examples that we gave early on with the Joan Rivers, the taking the pictures at the nursing facility, the student nurse. So those are all things that nurses should not be doing. And the law that speaks to that is this 4723.
Right.
0.28. Yeah. B31. Yeah.
There's more.
There's way more. So not only are we to establish and maintain professional boundaries, we're also to provide privacy. As we were talking earlier, those pictures at the nurse's station where, so-and-so, you're celebrating retirement. Was there a patient walking down the hall behind them?
Right.
Was there
your computer screen up and you forgot to close Epic or whatever you're using? That could be enlarged.
There's names on the
the board.
Yeah, the board behind. I'm like blanking here. I'm like,
You've been out of the hospital too
long. So if you're on a telemetry unit and your telemetry data is right behind you, there you go. There's names with all those. So also, like we were talking about privacy during examination and treatment. So there are some facilities, there are some home health agencies, different folks who you take pictures for your job. Well, are you taking those on your private phone? Are you taking those on your work phone? If you're taking them on your private phone, you will need clear, agreements with your employer. Do you then do all your pictures uploaded to the cloud? Well, that's right. No longer your photo now. Or, maybe that gets shared inadvertently because, there's times where I just yep, CVS, print all these pictures, please.
Right.
So now I've shared this private picture of this patient, so be careful about that. Be thinking about, oh, wait, where could I maybe have violated this? Also, we want to treat our patients with courtesy, respect, and full recognition of dignity and individuality. And we've all had that experience where we just really wish somebody would just get it and stop behaving this way and be in our care yet again. It is not appropriate to post your views about the drug-addicted mother, the DUI, whatever that is on social media. I think one of the best things I saw with this, and I felt like this nurse, I really respected what he had to say. He was a trauma nurse, and before he would be he was a advanced practice nurse. And so there were times where he'd have to go in and talk with a family that, this patient died or is dying, or he would look at the social media of the victim in order to see a different point of view, because all he had seen is the gunshot victim or the drunk driver or whatever, that this was someone who was loved, that, had family, maybe had a dog, whatever, so that he could go into those conversations and not be mad at the fact that this person had killed themselves, whatever it was. I'm like, that's really cool. And he didn't, in doing that, he didn't mention where he worked. He didn't talk about the type of victims. He just gave this general assessment. And I'm like, now that was really an interesting thing to do. I thought that was kind of cool to do. But also it was really cool that in his post about this, he just was very general. He wasn't, there was no way that this could get back to a specific patient or anything like that.
I actually read an article recently about a doctor, an emergency medicine doctor that did the same thing. And that was his point. It helped him really see that person as a person instead of just another patient, on his caseload. And
maybe it was the same article. Maybe it
could have been
misremembered.
Either way, it's cool.
Yeah.
It's a nice thing to do because we are trying to treat every patient with that respect and dignity, regardless of the situation and whether or not we agree with their lifestyle or actions, or it's really not our place because of that boundary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, what you mentioned earlier about us being the most respected profession, the reason for that is that, I think they do trust us with, like I said, very
Everything.
sensitive information, and so if we are out there putting on social media sensitive information, our judgment of their behavior, not thinking about, why did they become a drug addict? Did they have something horrible happen to them? Did something get overprescribed? We know now that there's a lot of actions that we did as healthcare professionals that have led to this epidemic. So be thinking before you post.
And my background is in the emergency room, and so unfortunately I've seen a lot of this stuff happen, and I know from patients will tell you, I almost didn't come in here today because I had an experience where I felt judged, or where the nurse made a face at me when I said, I had relapsed, or whatever it is. And it's true, patients will stop seeking care if they feel that they're not getting the respect that they deserve, regardless of what they did. They're there because they need help in one way or another, probably multiple ways. And it's our job, it's the law, to be there for them no matter what, and to not pass that judgment.
So we also shouldn't exhibit behavior that could reasonably interpreted as physical, verbal, mental, or emotional abuse. So, that California, or excuse me, Canada example, that was considered emotional abuse. And there are things that we could inadvertently say, and I get it. We have stressful jobs. A lot of times, you just, I can't believe this happened, or I can't believe da 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 da. Be careful. The other one on misappropriating a patient's property, obtain personal gain at patient's expense, we shouldn't be doing that. And this is where I was thinking about the patient that asks us to take a picture with their phone, or maybe ask us to take a picture with our phone. That's their personal property, that actual picture. Do we have written consent? This came up sometimes too with nurses who engage with students, like either they're the school nurse, or they have a clinic or something like that. And maybe the parent might want, you're calling on the phone and like, I'm not sure what this mark is. I'm not sure what this is. Have they reacted to a bee sting in the past, or whatever that is? And they take a picture and send it, or they use the student's phone to take a picture. So there's other instances of where, home health is another thing that we need to be careful about with patients and their personal properties. So maintaining boundaries, all of these laws revolve around that.
And I think home health is a good example of how the financial relationships could get muddy, even if both parties involved mean well. It's just not appropriate to go down that road at all.
Yes, I know. I've had friends who were in home health where the patient would ask them to pick up some groceries or something. Well, if that's not part of your relationship with, however you're contracted or whatever, I would steer clear and be thinking of other ways that you could help that patient get groceries or whatever. So there's different things that have happened. Yeah. Also, it's really important to maintain confidentiality. I know we've all been a part of, you get on that elevator and there's two people who were having a private conversation about a particular patient, but you are not in the care of that patient. So I've had to speak up like, hey, you need to move this conversation to a more private location. I'm not involved with that patient's care. This is another thing with what we were talking about, forwarding text or forwarding emails. If that's a way that you communicate with other healthcare professionals, maybe I know I've inadvertently in my job, typed the wrong name. And luckily, I don't do anything that's related to patients directly right now. So it didn't mean it. I just,
CCs sometimes get us.
Yeah. And, you need to be careful about disclosing identifiable patient information without a consent. I really worried about this too, like when I was a clinical instructor and you're sending assignments to students, how do you go about doing that? How confidential is that? Make sure that you put no forwarding on any emails. Make sure that you might need to encrypt certain things so that things don't get sent to someone that it wasn't intended for.
And there are very specific laws now with, state laws and HIPAA and all those sorts of things. That HIPAA is even broken down with special rules for substance abuse care. And again, it might not be that you're intending to share the wrong information or break confidentiality, but there are very limited circumstances when it's okay to give some information out. And so if you're not sure, it's best to ask or just receive consent in the appropriate way. Just not have that conversation if you're not comfortable with it.
Yeah. So nurses shall not disseminate a patient information for other than patient care. We talked about this. And then now it's specific to social media, through social media, texting, email, or any form of communication. So there's your specific law related to that. And as I said earlier, this also applies to nursing students via required school policies. So, like I said before, I don't know that many nursing students know this. So any way you have to influence, please do, so that we can protect them and make sure that they are successful and become nurses, and that they're not impeded by a mistake they make in nursing school that could affect their future career. So what can happen if you misuse social media and violate a patient boundary? So legally, there might be a licensure action. You could have civil or criminal penalties depending on how grievous the occurrence was. You might have some personal loss, defamation of your own character, invasion of privacy. If you put something out there and you may not realize that maybe someone from the media might contact you, different things could happen. Other folks could harass you on social media, right? It might also lead to patient abuse and inadvertently being exploited as well. So even though maybe if you're no longer licensed, maybe it's something that happened while you were licensed and now you're no longer licensed, but then that patient is a victim for years to come.
Right. We all know that things on social media from years ago have a way of coming back. And just when you least expect it, that one text you sent or picture you posted or whatever the case may be, it can come back.
Yeah, I know. And if there's anything that you're thinking like, oh, wow, what about that thing we did years ago? Does that constitute? So you have to think for yourself. If there's something that you feel needs to be reported, you can self-report yourself and let the board know this was a mistake. That's up to you how you want to handle that. That might be something to mitigate the consequences. If you're listening to this presentation and you're like, wait, I didn't know that, or I saw something. The other thing too is be talking with your teammates about, how can we still have our work Facebook page or whatever that is, and prevent some of these things that we've talked about today.
I think it is important to have that conversation with your peers. Because people can tag you in a picture. And if you're not really paying attention, I'm in all the dog groups and everything. So I get all these notifications, and it's easy to maybe skip over one that someone tagged me in so-and-so, and I didn't put it up there, but now it's connected to my social media, and that picture of me at the bar on Friday is now up there. And so it's just important to have a conversation if you have any peers that maybe would do that. Like, hey, I'm a nurse. I really would appreciate you not posting things without asking me before you do.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you said that too, Jessica. I'm not sure if this is on a slide later, and if it is, we'll just go through it. But one of the things that I saw too that was really interesting, if there have been nurses who have had legal action against them because of something like what you just spoke about. So they were at a party the night before. The posting was at 1 or 2 a.m. They were clearly intoxicated, and then they then went to work the next day, and there was a medical error. And the lawyer, in looking through posts, looking through everything associated with that nurse, which they have right to when there's legal action, that nurse actually was criminally indicted because the evidence was there that she probably was impaired when she came on the job. Yeah. So we talked about, the title of this presentation is both ethical and legal boundaries. So we're going to talk a little bit about the ethics involved, which is the same as your legal. So you not only have a legal mandate in order to maintain professional boundaries, but also an ethical. So what is ethics? It's a set of moral principles, especially ones related to affirming a specified group with their form of conduct. So the ANA has a set of ethical principles that we're going to continue to talk about. But just for clarification, what's the difference between the law versus ethics? Basically, if we all abided to our ethical standard, we wouldn't need laws. So that's your inherent moral sense. You have a choice whether or not you're going to adhere to it. So therefore, that's why the law a lot of times, because people choose not to stick with their moral compass or ethical standards. Laws tend to be rigid and they tend to multiply. So, 4723 has a lot of dot and numbers and letters and tend to have more. I always think back to when my kids were little and you would get these instructions for toys and you're like, oh my gosh, somebody has done that. They had to put this as a warning on the label. I feel the same thing about laws. We had to create a law for that because somebody didn't think they
That's how I feel about this whole presentation. I mean, really, I think the first time I gave a law and rule presentation, it was, to a group of seasoned nurses. And I told them, I can't believe I have to stand up here and tell you to treat patients with dignity and respect. It just seems so crazy that we have to have this conversation at all, but we do. And there's a reason that the board wants us to talk about this and you need it for your licensure because these things are still happening. Mm-hmm. And so we'll keep reminding you until hopefully this stops happening.
So that's why we have laws and rules around professional boundaries because, the ethical standard was not enough. So the ANA Code of Ethics, which is available free online, the entire Code of Ethics. So that's our ethical obligation and duties. This applies to every nurse and every setting. As nursing students, we learn these. We're supposed to abide by them as nursing students and then on into our professional career. It's ANA's commitment to society, and it's founded on the premise of respect for human dignity. And the most recent version, the reason why they had to come up with a newer version was because of social media. Mm-hmm. So they felt the need to speak to it. So I'm trying to recall, there's 7 or 8 provisions. We're going to talk about a couple of them here today. The nurse practices with compassion and respect for the inherent dignity, worth, and unique attributes of every person.
Sounds like the law.
Sounds exactly like the law. The thing that I love about what ANA said in this too is it's unrestricted by a social or economic status. I think a lot of times, like I said earlier about my example of practicing nursing internationally, I think sometimes we feel like we can, if we're a different social or economic status, that we can impinge upon somebody's rights and get in there and say or do things because they're poorer than us or different than us. But not true as nurses. I think that too, it is one of the things I love about my profession, that we care for everybody. And we do not ask if you have insurance. We do not, those are things that we need in order for billing purposes. Like I know we always ask about the finance, all that kind of stuff, but your ability to pay or not pay does not determine whether or not you receive our care. the nature of the health problem. I struggle every day with my weight, but yet I do not say to someone, I'm not going to take care of you because you're morbidly obese. And that's why you have all of these
Right.
other conditions. I empathize. I think that as nurses, we have a unique ability and training that we do see the person as a whole person, and that different things that happen to them and things, they're not to be judged, like you said earlier, but that you come here with a health need that we want to be part of your team to help you get well. And, we want to do that with compassion and respect. And so thinking about this provision one as it applies to social media, again, was that respectful? What was posted or said about the care that you give or the types of patients that you interact with. So be thinking about that. Lots of us have very difficult jobs that deal with very difficult situations. I think of the NICU nurses that have to care for the addicted babies. I'm sure there have been instances where they want to post something about that behavior, but that is not adhering to your ethical standards and obligations. The nurse's commitment is to the patient, whether an individual, family, group, or community. So, you might have things to comment on as far as maybe the community or group that patient is a part of. But we want to be committed to that patient and help them within those different social mechanisms that they are engaged in. We also need to recognize and maintain our boundaries. So although we may not agree with the religion of the patient, like I'm thinking specifically about, it's very difficult to take care of the Jehovah's Witness patient who cannot take the blood, and that they're going to die without it. But that is not our time to intervene on that boundary. It's our time to respect that boundary and, be there for them and care for them and do what we can outside of that particular thing that they cannot allow to have happen.
I think about the cultures that have certain beliefs about men and women in the room and what the woman should have on. And again, being in the emergency room, we're all about, okay, we need to get everything off in 5 minutes. Well, I might be okay with that with my culture, but maybe my patient is not. And it's not about what we're comfortable with, it's what they're comfortable with. And they have that boundary and we have to respect it. And it takes 2 seconds to just stop and think about it or stop and ask a question. And it means the difference to that patient for sure.
Yeah. We also have to be careful about the relationships that we have with patients or individual or a family or group or a community that we might have. I've had patients ask to be my friends on Facebook, or they, a friend of a friend, somebody who's on my Facebook feed because they're a friend of a friend or something. What if you walk into the room and you see that person that you might only know on social media because they're part of your neighborhood Facebook group? Just be very careful. That might be a conflict of interest. So you want to limit those relationships. I think generally the rule of thumb is at least a year. For me personally, I really don't ever want to friend anybody who was a previous patient. I had an instance early in my career where I took care of a family member's friend, and I made sure I never talk to that family member about that particular friend, all that. Well, then fast forward almost 20 years, we're at a wedding and there's that patient from 20 years ago, and they told my family member about how I took care of them. So it was really cool. But I felt so good about the fact that my family did not know that I had cared for this particular person.
They shouldn't know.
Yeah. And it was really cool. So, it was one of those things where literally I hadn't seen this person for 20 years. Pretty cool. The nurse promotes, advocates for, and protects the rights, health, and safety of the patient. So, again, this is where we need to be careful about posting, right? We could, that room number, whatever. Do you notice that we repeat ourselves? We're trying to get it down that you understand that this is both a legal and an ethical obligation. And I think it's really cool that our laws here in Ohio line up to our ethical standards as well. They're not out there like weird things. These are things that we should be doing, not only legally, but ethically.
Right.
Yeah. And obviously privacy, confidentiality, and why? To maintain trust. So, as we've said, I think more than once, the need for healthcare does not justify unwarranted intrusion into a patient's life. Now, think about our other example about that physician who looked at the Facebook feed of the dead patient, to be able to talk to the family member and see. We should not be skimming our patients' social media as we care for them to find out or dig up information about them.
No, well, we shouldn't.
No. Or be judging whatever we found based on something we've seen on social media.
Hold on, before I give them the SNED, let me look them up on Facebook.
Yeah, no. And again, we want to maintain that trust. Also, I was on the floor, Jessica was in the ER. I know there are times, and I would have ER nurses ask me, they want to follow up on that patient. They're no longer involved in that care. Yes. They should not be calling up to the floor and say, how is so-and-so? We should not be calling down to our friend in the ER or be talking at the cocktail party about that guy who came through. That is totally inappropriate. So, be thinking about that at your next social gathering. It's very tempting. Don't get me wrong. It's super tempting. You want to follow up, but once they're out of our care, we should not be following up on them. And then, so like I said before, that the Code of Ethics was revised. And why was it revised? Because of social media. And we need to maintain confidentiality in all venues. Look at this, whether on duty or off.
I think that's pretty much summing up the whole presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the benefits and the risks of social media. Like I said, this is a good slide to be sharing with those that you have the ability to influence. Oh, yes, the myths. I think a lot of us have seen this. We've seen, people who've been victims of this, is that, it is a myth that your post is private. We've talked about, how long did it take? Okay. I'm sure the people at Snapchat knew that we all had the ability on our phones to take a screenshot, but yet they sold it hook, line, and sinker, that this picture was only available for 20 seconds.
I cannot tell you how many people, when I, first heard about Snapchat, I don't even have Snapchat. I'm like, what is this? Like, yeah, but you can send something and then it deletes it. Like, that is their big sell. And I'm like, yeah, but not really, because again, screenshots, who knows what really techie people can come up with. You can't guarantee that post really goes away.
Yeah. That delete button, basically it gets it out of your queue. It's still there. It's all about code. There's some way to read code and get to that.
And like the cloud, like you said before, who knows what somebody's phone is set up like, and how when they save things or screenshot, or who knows, it's just not a risk that we would be willing to take as professional nurses. And so that's really the whole point. It's risky, and it could really jeopardize your career and even bring you into the legal system.
Yeah. It's a myth that it's okay to discuss if you don't refer to the patient by name. De-identifying data is very difficult. So you need to be thinking about, the age, anything that you're saying. I mean, even saying male, female, there are certain things, that can go back to that person. So be very, very careful. I know that, we build case studies all the time. There's specific cases that you want to talk about, making sure that you have consent either to do that, mm-hmm. or that you've de-identified it to a point that it's no longer able to get back to that patient. It's not your post. It wasn't just one picture. The person gave me permission. How did they give you permission?
Do you have any proof of that?
There was nothing negative. That baby being born was very positive in your life, right? I took it down right away, so no problem. How many people have seen it before it got taken down? So as we've said, you have both a legal and an ethical obligation for treating people with dignity, not causing emotional abuse, not becoming inappropriately involved in patients' personal relationships, and maintaining confidentiality. And as we said throughout the presentation, that social media presents significant challenges. So there are some guidelines to avoid problems. If you have done all of these, you recognize your legal and ethical obligations, you transmit with extreme care, using your electronic health record only, those kinds of things. The patient has the right to confidentiality at all times. These are all things that we've said, how to avoid problems, basically. It's those myths transferred there. I love the last one. Use professional titles when communicating via email. So avoid email addresses such as Foxy Lady. Believe it or not, I've had some things come across like that.
I got one the other day here in this job. Someone had emailed me, a nurse, and I remember doing a double take at her email address, thinking, "Oh no,
you need
that's
to tell
just
her.
not what you should have."
Like I said, use caution when having online contact with patients or former patients. Not making comments in their feed that others will know that you were part of their treatment team or know something about their medications or whatever that is.
Because we don't know what they have told other people in their lives.
Right.
We might think it's obvious that everybody knows whatever it is. It could be something as simple as a medication or, some gender identity issues. Like, we cannot assume what everyone else knows. And so it's just not appropriate to bring up anything that was discussed in that patient nurse situation.
Right. If you have questioned as you've been listening to this, like, hey, I use my work phone, I use my personal phone for work. You need to start working on some policies and procedures, and we have some advice for that. Also, as we talked earlier, report promptly any identified breach of confidentiality or privacy within your organization, and maybe even to the board if that's necessary. These are all things that we've talked about. Don't make disparaging remarks about your employer or your coworkers. Also, as in that Canadian example at the beginning, that can be seen as abuse. Mm-hmm. We have a position statement for social media and healthcare that's available on our website and here for you to see. We also want to protect nurses from patients and visitors using their phone with us as well. I remember specifically, my first child was born 16 years ago, and we weren't allowed to have a video camera in the room. What was very obvious if you brought a video camera into the room those days. Now it's a phone.
It's happened several times in my career in the emergency room where people will be having a video on their phone, and we every time have to ask them to please not do that because it isn't appropriate, and we have boundaries as well as nurses and rights, and it's real easy to be sneaky. And it's just something that we need to be mindful of.
And that could harm other patients too. Think about semi-private rooms. Think about, a confidential conversation in the hall. If the mic is up.
It's happened so many times, and it's sad.
Yeah, so we need to be educating the public as well as to how they should be engaged when they're in a healthcare situation as well. Signs, maybe some restrictions, and then an employee policy for using your private phone for work needs. You have seen all of these tips as we've gone throughout our presentation. The last one, check your privacy settings. So that you have separate personal and professional information online. That being said, I think the best way to go is just be as professional as possible and not very personal as a nurse in our profession. Like I said, you can't prevent how other people tag you sometimes, but I just have extreme caution with pictures. I don't want a glass of wine in my hand. I don't want, I don't know, just different things I've said to people over the years of like, please don't tag me in that. And it's really, it's a glass of wine, but still it's just one of those things that like, would you want your employer? Do you want that going out?
And I don't typically have my employer on my social media.
No.
I know a lot of nurses that do, and I'm sure they have nothing to worry about. But it's just, I like to keep it separate completely in the event that maybe somebody did tag something or took a picture and I wasn't paying attention or whatever the situation is. Not that I'm doing anything crazy.
Right.
But you never know. And so I do not have it publicly displayed everywhere, when I work for healthcare organizations.
Definitely, me too. And then ANA also has principles for social networking in the nurse. So all those things that we talked about back in the provisions from the ANA Code of Ethics, they also have at nursingworld.org some tips as well. And then the National Council of State Boards of Nursing also has a great PDF. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking for more information, those are some great resources. We thank you so much for being part of our presentation today. And we're grateful that you've learned about maintaining maintaining professional, legal, and ethical boundaries when on social media. And this is always our favorite. Don't use social media to vent your frustrations. I think that a lot of us have done that.
So tempting.
It is so tempting. So one of the things I bought my friends for Christmas one year was a journal that says things I shouldn't say on the internet.
Love it.
So offensiveness is in the eye of the beholder. So you may not have thought it was offensive, but consider your audience. So please let us know if you have any questions or concerns about this presentation. Complete the evaluation and you will receive your certificate.